Fanalysis combines the data made popular in fantasy football with the latest sports betting trends, and that's how we find you the sharpest angles. For that, we turn to the lead betting analyst from CBS News New York, Jared Smith. Good to see you again, man.
It's been a while, and here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, a super wild card weekend, not just wild card weekend anymore. It's super.
It's crazy, man, because we expect when you get to the playoffs, all of these teams are going to be equally balanced, but we have, 3 games that are over 8.5 points as a spread, and some road favorites on two games as well. Let's just start with what is going to be your best bet. The Vikings are 3-point home favorites against the Giants. All right. Brian Daboll rested his starters before this week. So is this at all going to be a factor as you measure this one out?
I think it is. And I know this pick probably won't be too popular with the New York audience, but I just have to look at what these teams are right now compared to what they were 3 weeks ago when they played in the exact same scenario in the exact same venue. And the line was 4.5. And again, 1.5 points, not a huge adjustment, but in a 3-week stretch, I think it is. And especially when you move those 1.5 points onto a key number, the most key number of 3. So you have to ask yourself, all right, well, what's changed since then? Well, I don't think a whole lot. The Giants defensively are a little bit healthier. I think the Vikings offensive line is a little bit healthier. Bradbury, their center, the focal point of that offensive line, didn't play in the game 3 weeks ago. It looks like he's trending towards playing this week. The right tackle, Brian Brandel, on IR back then. Now he's off IR. Don't know if he's going to play this week, but it looks like, again, Vikings O-line trending in a positive direction. So I could say both teams slight adjustments to the positive since that game 3 weeks ago. But again, does that get me from 4.5 to 3? Not so sure. The other key factor here is first-time playoff quarterbacks facing off against non-first-timers. We've seen this trend rear its ugly head a lot recently, and the debutantes have not fared well. 14-35-1 against the spread. That's a 28.5% cover rate. Last year, all 3 first-timers got absolutely smoked, especially Jalen Hurts going on the road facing Tampa Bay. They lost by 16. Mac Jones going on the road to Buffalo lost by 30, and Kyler Murray lost by 23 at the Rams. So I think the defenses that those 3 quarterbacks faced, probably an upgrade from this Vikings defense. But again, is Daniel Jones going to make the right decisions? Maybe Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka point him in the right direction. But I think it's fair to, be a little skeptical about Daniel Jones's performance in this game.
First off, I want to say, kudos to you for not going with the popular choice here and looking at the analytics and letting the numbers tell you which way to go. But I'm going to use those numbers and point you maybe in the opposite direction because the Giants are 7-1 against the spread on the road this year, including that game against Minnesota. And historically, 75% of the playoff games are won by the team that outrushes their opponents. And the Giants have the 4th best rushing attack in the NFL. The rushing game, if you're starting to spell out how you see this game playing, can you see the Giants being the run-first team, at least in this game?
Maybe. I think the pushback on that statistic would be teams that run the ball more tend to be ahead, so they're already winning. So that kind of correlates to that stat a little bit.
Good, yeah.
I understand where you're coming from, and I agree, especially in an outdoor cold weather environment, you want to be able to run the football. But I don't know if that stat specifically tells the story because, again, if you're ahead and you're running the ball a lot, you're already winning the game. So your percentages of winning probably are going to be high anyways. I think the key is what kind. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that makes sense. And I think that, first off, I follow you on Twitter as well because you're always coming up with some analytics that will force people to take a look at something and maybe in a different way. And this week you threw in the yards per play stat, which you mix into your stew of information. It's not the determining factor, but the Giants' yards per play in their last 3 games has jumped from 5.2 to 5.9. The Vikings have gone up as well, but the Vikings' opponents' yards per play has also gone up dramatically. So that net result has really seen a little bit of a difference. Do you see that I guess that trend leading towards the Giants finding themselves, if you're trying to find an analytical way to address it?
Definitely a lot of things about this matchup that scares me on the Vikings side defensively. I think offensively, if you look at the game that they played 3 weeks ago, I think it's fair to say that the Vikings underachieved a little bit offensively in that game. Kirk Cousins was under duress. The Vikings offensive line did not play well. He was sacked 4 times, was hit 11 times. But you still saw the explosion with Jefferson and Hawkinson going off for over 200 yards and 25 catches. But I just think some of the consistency for the Vikings down to down wasn't there. On the other side, that was Daniel Jones's, I want to say, maybe his best game of the year. He had over 300 yards passing. He'd only had 2 games all season with 300 yards or more passing. He also had 2 big-time throws, the second game all season with at least 2. So the explosion for Daniel Jones was there, and it still took a touchdown in the final minute to tie the game. And then, of course, the Vikings were able to drive down the field late and win the game by a field goal. But when I look at the Giants' offense against the Vikings' defense, they were able to kind of surprise the Vikings' secondary by throwing a lot on early downs. Well, you would hope Ed Donatel is going to watch that tape and make some adjustments. Where, again, on the other side, I think Daniel Jones, can he replicate what was one of his best performances of the season in his first ever playoff game on the road? And I agree, the Vikings defense, when I look at the analytics, it's not pretty. The Giants defensively, also not pretty. So I do see both offenses having some success in this game. I think it's more the adjustments that Ed Donatel makes in the secondary. And the one thing I'll mention, the blitz is going to be key here. The Vikings don't get a lot of pressure. They don't blitz a ton. They only blitzed on about 24.5% of plays against Daniel Jones in that last game, but he carved him up pretty good, 8 for 11 for 105 yards against the blitz. If I'm Ed Donatel, I am backing off the aggression. I'm going to drop in coverage, and I'm going to make Daniel Jones beat me with his brain, diagnose the coverage. Now, his legs could also be a problem in this game. We've seen the Vikings struggle against mobile quarterbacks. That's an X factor here. But again, when I look at that trend of first-time quarterbacks, especially on the road, I get a little bit scared. I don't think the numbers we've seen from Jones are going to repeat themselves in this game.
All right. I appreciate you, all the points that you're making in this one. We stay in the NFC for the Cowboys and the Bucs. The spread is Tampa at a 2.5-point home dog with the over-under at 45. What do you find interesting here?
Fantastic matchup this is. I really think the over has a lot of value here. So these two teams played in week 1. The total was 49.5. Interesting circumstances going in. The Bucs were very banged up offensively, especially on the offensive line. And then the Cowboys, Dak Prescott got hurt midway through the game. There wasn't a touchdown scored in that game until midway through the third quarter. In this particular matchup, we have plenty of data points to look back on. And I think the one that interests me most is the recent play of the Cowboys secondary. 25th in passing DVOA since week 13. And if you look at the competition they faced during that time, sure, Trevor Lawrence, he's an elite quarterback, or at least ascending to that status. The other quarterbacks they faced during that stretch, Davis Mills, Matt Ryan, Gardner Minshew, Joshua Dobbs, Sam Howell, making his first career start. Not exactly this, spread it out, run and gun, greatest show on turf offenses that the Cowboys been facing. I think the Bucs, if they're able to throw the ball on early downs, and it's all about the scheme with Byron Leftwich. He's been a little conservative this year. In that game against the Panthers, the game that they had to win, the game that I bet on them to win because I thought it was a good matchup, 61% success rate on early down throws compared to 33% success rate on early down runs. It ain't rocket science. If Byron Leftwich is aggressive and he attacks what's a relatively weak secondary for the Cowboys, I think they're going to have a lot of success moving the ball. And then you make Dak Prescott turn into a very aggressive passer. Don't love what I've seen with him lately, trusting his eyes, reading coverages, but still a very dangerous Dallas receiving group. And I think there's going to be some points in this game if Tampa Bay throws it on early downs like I hope they do.
I mean, no doubt about it. Dak Prescott has been throwing up picks left and right since week 8. And 3 of the last 4 games, the Cowboys have been outgained in those games. But also the Bucs getting 2 offensive linemen back, which has got to be a relief for Tom Brady. So is there any way that you would possibly parlay this with Brady over 273.5?
Yeah, I think the game script favors that. It's a very correlated bet. The Cowboys like to get pressure. 3rd in pressure rate this season. You know about Micah Parsons, leads the NFL with pressures. You've got, Lawrence and Armstrong and Fowler Jr. They've combined for 20 sacks this season. Even their starting safety, Donovan Wilson, 5 sacks. That's the most sacks of any safety in the NFL this season. So Dan Quinn likes to bring the pressure from different directions. But if there's one guy that I think can diagnose that and get the ball where it needs to be effectively, it is Tom Brady. And a lot of jokes this week, well, Tom's really the offensive coordinator. Byron can do whatever he wants. If Tom sees something on the line of scrimmage, he is going to make the adjustments, and he is going to check out of a run or into a pass or whatever, scheme they are showing. But I do think Dan Quinn is a really good defensive coordinator. And I think he's going to have some interesting coverage disguises for Tom in this game. The key is, again, what is the Bucs' appetite for aggression early in this game? Are we just going to see them run the ball on first down, set up second and third and longs, and hope Tom can bail them out? Or are they going to do what they did in the Panthers game? And that is go up tempo, maybe go no huddle, and put the pressure on Dak Prescott with all the interceptions, picking 7 straight games. He's got a ton of turnover-worthy plays this year, way more than you really expect. If they put the pressure on Dak, I think that'll bode much better for the Bucs' chances of winning this game.
Turnover-worthy plays, Dak Prescott's right up there with Justin Fields right now in the last 8 weeks. All right, like I was saying, we expect a balanced play, but this weekend's schedule features more than half of the weekend's schedule is over a touchdown spread, and that includes that Seahawks game getting 9.5 in San Francisco. How do you see this one?
This is another interesting game, and I think overall, big picture, when you talk about bigger spreads, there might be a little bit of hesitation with a gambler. Oh, that's a lot of points, and you're going to hear that phrase a lot this week. Yeah, exactly. And the third time's the charm, right? We've seen Seattle lose 2 games. They weren't able to cover either time against San Francisco. Now that line stretched out to almost 10 points, and we saw them even earlier in the year. They were only an 8.5-point underdog in this spot. But I think if you like San Francisco, and there's a lot of things to like, the matchup really favors the Niners, especially running the ball against that Seattle defense. I think George Kittle has a really positive matchup. The Seahawks really struggle DVOA-wise. They're a bottom 5 team defending the tight end this year. But overall, the Bills, Dolphins have one of these big spreads, Bengals, Ravens as well. The team that wins the game on Wild Card Weekend historically tends to cover about 72% of the time. So don't be afraid. If you think the matchup really favors San Francisco, and I think it does, don't be afraid to lay that number because, again, 7 out of 10 times, even more so than that, almost 7.5 out of 10 times, the team that wins the game, this weekend especially, tends to cover the spread also.
This is a no bet for you because, there's a lot of rain and wind in San Francisco this weekend. The over-under is at 42. When you have a low total and a big spread, that just seems to not match up. The numbers just don't seem to match up there.
Yeah, and usually we tend to overhype the weather. Obviously, the only people that get things wrong more than me are the meteorologists. But I think in general, when you're talking about weather, it's more wind than rain. And the wind looks relatively calm in Santa Clara this weekend. It is the rain. Now, in California, I've never lived there, but I've heard stories. It can be really nasty at times. But I'm not banking on the weather having a massive impact on this game, but there is still hesitation. I'm not as confident placing a bet here on a Thursday or a Friday without seeing what the conditions are pregame. So while it's fair to be hesitant about placing a bet before you see what the weather is, it is rare, very rare, that a game will be drastically impacted by weather in the NFL, unless it is extremely windy, or you have blizzard type conditions or torrential downpour type conditions, but usually those don't sustain themselves for the entire game.
Well, the play calling definitely can be impacted by the weather. As a matter of fact, Vegas seems to think that this is going to be a run-first Niners team because McCaffrey's prop is going up and up. It's now at 73.5. Here's the thing, though. In his last 4 games with Elijah Mitchell, who is healthy, he's got 45, 32, 39, and 38 yards rushing. So while you might think that McCaffrey and that number ticking up would lean on a prop for McCaffrey over, the number suggests you might want to go McCaffrey under.
Yeah, and I don't have a ton of specific numbers on McCaffrey because there's not a ton of priors. He's obviously only been with the Niners for a few weeks. I think the issue with betting receivers or running back props with San Francisco is it's the same reason why I struggle with betting Chiefs receivers or running back props. It's Patrick Mahomes. He's the trigger man. And it's Andy Reid. He's the brains. That's how I feel about San Francisco. It's, in this case, Brock Purdy, who's maybe not as big of an upside as Mahomes, but it's really Kyle Shanahan. He has so many weapons. How do you, unless you're in the meeting rooms with him, how do you know who is going to be the focal point this week and how he's going to tweak the game plan to take advantage of a team that has already seen his offense twice this year. I think that's very hard to predict if you're trying to really focus in on one specific San Francisco 49er this week. But I can tell you that George Kittle really should have a good game because the Seahawks struggle to defend tight ends. If you look at the numbers against Travis Kelce earlier this year, the Chiefs had 297 yards and Kelce had 113 of them. Kittle had 2 touchdowns in the last game. I think Kittle's the guy I would lean on this week.
Yeah, and Kittle over the past 3 weeks of the NFL season has been absolutely phenomenal, looking like that all-pro tight end that we expected to see out of him this year. All right, that's how Jared sees the NFC playoff matchups. Check out our other segment in the AFC games on Wild Card Weekend. For Jared Smith of CBS News New York, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.